While the Russians struggle to keep advancing, the US are stopping vital resupply for the Ukrainian armed forces and leave us with the question, do the US expect an own war to start fairly soon? But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened along the front lines and behind them in this SITREP about the war in Ukraine. The Ukrainians managed to hit the Kupol electromechanical factory in Izhevsk. That is 1,300 kilometers away from Ukraine. In it, Tor and OSA surface-to-air missile systems are being produced, as well as the Garpia attack drones. According to the geolocation there and videos there, a fire has started. Secondary explosions were audible, so we know that something was hit there and something bigger was hit there. There were supposedly local claims that over 20 people died. I have not been able to verify this, so as of now, I'm not sure to the exact exact damage. Then we have a new report by the United Nations Human Rights Council. Here in this, it says that the number of civilian deaths inside of Ukraine is rapidly rising. Between December and May, 968 civilians were killed, 4,807 were wounded. That's 37% more than in the prior year during the same duration. The UNHCR has also confirmed and documented 106 executed prisoners of war from the Ukrainian side. So Ukrainians that were prisoners of war but killed by the Russians between August 2024 and May 2025. They also have recorded systematic torture of Ukrainian prisoners of war. The UN also at the same time has recorded the execution of one Russian prisoner of war by Ukrainian soldiers. In total, since the beginning of the war, they have documented 26 of those killings of Russian prisoners of war, extra legal killings of prisoners of war. Russian prisoners of war have also reported torture and mistreatment, but every time only before they were handed over to the official prisoner of war centers. So basically by the first units that took them prisoners, some have reported being mistreated in these cases, and we do have visual evidence of this from the past. But as you can see, the difference between the two is stark. This needs to be emphasized because it is recorded as well. We have 26 confirmed or likely executions of prisoners of war, and the Russians have killed over 100 within just less than a year in the last 10 months roughly. Then the Center of Human Rights in Armed Conflict has come to the conclusion that the attack on the prisoner of war center Volnovashka close to Olenivka in Donetsk that's on the Russian-controlled side on the 28th July 2022, where Ukrainian prisoners of war were killed, was conducted by the Russians. This is not really a surprise or nothing really new, as before other analyses have come to that same conclusion, that the Russian claim that a Ukrainian GMLRS missile has been responsible for that is impossible because of the damage of the area. Also, there were satellite pictures that indicated mass graves being dug before that building was hit, which obviously requires prior knowledge. We also need to say that that prisoner of war center was under control of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, and in the prison itself, Azov fighters were. So the two, basically the even more radicals on the Russian side were facing the Azov fighters, which are one of the most fearsome and obviously most hated fighters on the Russian side, so most hated by the Russians. We'll switch to the developments along the front line, and here we have from Sumy no reports about fresh advances. We have the Ukrainians reporting again that the amount of Russian attacks in the direction of Sumy is being reduced, is getting fewer. They are getting fewer and fewer. We have this now every few days. So according to this, unless this is being repeated at the same time, this would indicate that the Russian activities continue to decline in this area. We switch to Kharkiv. Nothing changed there. I cannot confirm any change in territory. We switch to the Eastern Front, and here once again, the Russians have claimed that they captured Luhansk. We see on the deep state map that a significant part of Luhansk is still under Ukrainian control, roughly this year. Significant is a little exaggerated. That's less than 1% at this point, but it includes two towns, Novye Horivka and Nadia, as well as smaller areas here where Ukrainian positions are still in. And we have here Boris Roshin from the Russian side also confirming that these towns are still under Ukrainian control or still contested. So as of now, this is clearly not correct. That's it on the Eastern Front. I cannot confirm any Russian advance. We switch to Siversk, the same. No confirmed Russian advance. We switch to the Konstantinivka area here. And here we have the Russians advancing. We have them now raising the flag in the northern part of Delivka. This means that likely they captured this area here. This should now be under Russian control, at least temporarily. They were able to raise the flag, and we have the Russians advancing west of it. Here they have been spotted at just 150 meters from the main road that still is being used for supply the Ukrainian troops there. This is obviously making the situation ever more precarious here. So I guess we should expect a withdrawal from the Ukrainians from the southern area rather soon, but we'll have to see. The Ukrainians are holding out there for months already under circumstances where, as an observer, most will probably wonder how they even managed to keep supplying them, how they managed to keep rotating them. But they are definitely getting too close for comfort to that road that is still being able to supply the Ukrainians in the mine here. But that was it from the Konstantinivka region. We go to the Pokrovsk region, and here we have the deep state map showing a Russian success. According to the deep state, the Russians more or less took this here. So all of this here is now being considered under Russian control. I have not seen visual evidence of this, but as the deep state map is pro-Ukrainian, and then it's obviously unlikely that they say that an area is conquered by the Russians without it actually being so. Thus, we take this as a given and accept it that the Russians managed to take Koptieve and are in Razine, and Razine is now a contested area, so that they managed to advance further in the western direction here and obviously continue to threaten Pokrovsk and Mynograd from the north this way. Then we have a Ukrainian advance right to the south of it in Lyubivka. We have a geolocation of them here at this point, at least if Google Maps works for me. Here. I've seen the source video though, and while it's true that a Ukrainian armored vehicle is driving in there, it's an M113, it is being hit by a drone, and then the vehicle is being taken out, and there are soldiers visible, wounded, probably KIA at this point, while they are still being recorded from an armed drone that could keep striking then afterwards. So while the Ukrainians have technically entered this area, I do not see them likely being under control of this. So technically, they have advanced to this, but I do not think it's under their control. But at the same time, I do not see any Russian presence. So considering this area here under Russian control seems to be wrong as well. Probably at least to this degree should we have an extended gray zone, an extended contested area, no man's land, but a Ukrainian success looks, to be honest, a little bit different. According to the Ukrainians, the Russians are concentrating on the area along the TO 504. That's not much of a surprise. That's this road here. We see them both in their attempts to reach Stepanivka to cut off the pocket here, as well as to advance west or north of Mynograd and Pokrovsk to force a withdrawal of the Ukrainians here. Apart from their activity here, according to the Ukrainians, it's mostly reconnaissance in the Pokrovsk area. It's mostly reconnaissance and a remote mining of the lines of communication. The Ukrainians are also reporting that the Russians use a lot of scooters that are being used to move around by the Russian infantry, and as they are fairly light, they can be carried over impassable area and then be reused once there is flat terrain again. Also an probably unexpected development in infantry warfare before this war. The Russians, according to the Ukrainians, also have quantitative superiority in drones in this area, according to the Ukrainians themselves. Then we switch to the Novopavlivka area, and here we have the Russians in Oleksivka, here or right east of Oleksivka, geolocated right here. This is more or less, I think, at this point. But we see that this pocket here is probably currently in the process of being pushed in. If they are still Ukrainians, they're in the process of withdrawing, or that's what we would expect. So that should not be a surprise. The front line is probably going to be corrected like this fairly soon. West of it, though, the Russians have proven to be in Dachne. We have a geolocation of this as well. Here they are in northern Dachne. Whether they were able to completely take control over Dachne or not, I cannot say, but this is important in a political sense, as this is Russian presence inside of Dnipro Oblast once again, probably with the capture of Dachne, but we'll have to observe that. Other than that, to the west of it, we have the Russians close to Pidubne. Here to the east of it, whether they came from the south, from Fedorivka and Komar, or whether they came from the east is unclear, but as we can see, the deep state map thinks they have advanced towards the west, and in the last SITREP I've shown you that Sirka is likely under Russian control as well, so they are in the process of reaching Pidubne, and then we can obviously expect this here to collapse here as well and turn into a Russian-controlled area. That was it with the territorial changes. We see nothing changed. The Russians are still having some success along this route here. There's no tactical breakthrough, there's no quick advances by the Russian, but there are somewhat consistent advances roughly in this direction. Other than that, the Russians were stopped for now in the Konstantinivka area. They might have had some success here, and this here is probably the more critical advance the Russians have achieved lately. If they reach Rodnyske, then of course they can threaten Pokrovsk and Minograd from the north and are capable of increasingly cutting off resupply and rotations into the two cities, so the situation there will slowly become untenable. But this is too early as of now. We'll have to see. We can see here on the topographical map that the high ground is still under Ukrainian control in this area, but the situation there is definitely not advantageous for the Ukrainians. Then we have news from the Zaporizhzhia region. According to the GUR, the Ukrainian military intelligence, the railroad tracks have been blown up by partisans. We see here a drone showing that the railroad tracks have been blown up. This then seems to have made a train stop and stopped the Russians, and the Ukrainians managed to attack the train engine as well. And according to them, to their own words, they managed to block the traffic for over a week here with these attacks on the logistics. In troop generations, we have news that Budanov is saying that North Korean citizens are signing. Budanov is the head of the military intelligence. He's saying that the North Korean citizens are signing contracts with the Russian military as volunteers. Now, the obvious thing is that there are no North Koreans that can volunteer to the Russian armed forces unless they have permission or encouragement from the government in Pyongyang. So this might be a way to politically allow the North Koreans to support the Russians without involving their military directly, without sending them in their own uniforms, without openly admitting that they are helping the Russians occupy and conquer Ukraine. We talked about it recently that there are expectations from South Korea that the North Koreans will get involved in Ukraine itself in July or in August, and this might be a way for that. Ukraine is also doing troop generation. The army corps are now receiving training battalions, which, if I understood it correctly, are going to train the units for those corps itself. So basically the army corps will have their own resupply in personnel organized by itself. And Syrskyi, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainians, has forbidden to set up tent areas for like concentration of troops in training grounds to protect the soldiers from long-distance attacks. Just recently, it happened at least twice that Ukrainian soldiers died in training grounds due to Russian attacks, as they are obviously concentrated there, and if the Russians see it early enough, they can shoot a ballistic missile on the training ground and kill lots of Ukrainian soldiers before they are even fully trained, and this is a way to address it, to obviously disperse the troops. Then we have in the political sphere some interesting news. After citizens of Azerbaijan had been arrested in Russia and were mistreated, 2 of them died in the process, Azerbaijan has answered. The bureau of Sputnik in Baku was raided by the official forces. Several of its workers there were incarcerated. Azerbaijan was then presenting the prisoners like the Russians do it, like masked persons holding them by the neck and forcing them to go crouched and to present them publicly. After that, we have the prisoners being presented to prison, and it shows not heavy injuries, but it shows that they were beaten up. Like, one has a very black eye, the other side face is completely blue and red. So the Russian citizens there were beaten up by the Azerbaijani police. This is clearly a political message towards Russia, not with us. The interesting part is this was the Sputnik Bureau, so they raided a Russian governmental news organization there. In both cases, by the way, each state is claiming they are criminals that have done criminal acts, and this is just legal law enforcement. But obviously that this is happening after Azerbaijanis are being arrested in Russia, that it's now happening the same inside of Azerbaijan is not a coincidence. Azerbaijan itself is still mad about the Russian reactions to the shoot down of the passenger plane on the 25th of December last year. Russia never properly apologized for this to a way that Azerbaijan was happy with the result. And now, obviously, they feel like Russia is doing whatever they want because they do not respect Azerbaijan. So Aliyev, the Azerbaijani president, has likely ordered this as a reaction to demonstrate to the Russians that there is no willingness to allow Russia to keep going on with this. Then we have an interesting collage by the BBC. About where they check Russian media, and new car sales in Russia fall by a quarter. Russians struggle to pay off credit card debt. Wage areas have tripled. June was the most alarming month for manufacturing industry in 3 years. All of this are not signs of a healthy economy. We talked about it in the past already. Russia's economy might not be directly close to collapse, but it's definitely not as healthy as its apologists and as the Russian government is claiming. Then we have international support, or the lack thereof. Pentagon halting some promised munitions for Ukraine. Now, the talk is that Pack 3 for the Patriot are being stopped. Those are used to defend against ballistic missiles. Then 155mm shells are being stopped. GMLRS are stopped. That's the HIMARS missile, the shorter ranged with 85-90 kilometers. Then Stinger manpads, AIM-7 air-to-air missiles, and Hellfire. AIM-7 are likely being used to intercept Shahid drones. They are more or less obsolete semi-active radar homing missiles that are no longer adequate for competent opponents, but against a missile or a cruise missile, they're obviously good enough. But they can also, or they should also, be able to be launched from the ground, like the Sea Sparrow missile, in an air defense role as well. So whether the Ukrainians use them from the F-16 to shoot down cruise missiles and drones, or whether they are using them in a surface-to-air role, I cannot really say. Hellfire is generally an anti-tank missile that is also being used for the Ukrainians. The claim for the reasons of that is that their own storage of weapons, that their own stockpiles have gotten too low. Interesting is that the Kremlin spokesperson said the fewer arms supplied to Ukraine, the closer the end of the special military operation will be, and he's obviously right. If Ukraine it does not receive weaponries, then it's much easier to defeat them. And part of the abilities, part of the things that are being delivered can only be delivered by the US, especially the PAC-3. Those are the most effective weapons to shoot down ballistic missiles, and the US right now is the only producer of this. So we also need to say, if the US are reducing their weapons deliveries, then Russia has no reason, has even less reason to give in negotiations and agree to a ceasefire and a peace, because they can expect that the Ukrainians' ability to defend themselves, to do counterattacks, is getting reduced ever more, and thus their own military victory comes closer. So if Trump wants to achieve a quick peace, this is the wrong way. It might achieve a quicker peace if by forcing the Ukrainians, or by allowing the defeat of Ukraine, but even that is not really soon yet. So this is failing. If Trump's plan was to achieve peace, this is going to fail. The storage of air defense missiles, according to media reports, are going to run out at the end of summer. This is obviously more a guess than official knowledge, because the Ukrainians will keep it secret how much missiles, how high the storage, how high the stockpiles still are. We have to say Zelensky did everything the US wanted. He signed the resource agreement. He agreed to an unconditional ceasefire. He did basically whatever Trump wanted, and he's receiving less weapons than before as a result. One of the reasons for that could be what we have here. There are recordings where you can see here in the bottom, you can see the air defense missiles rising up in Israel, recorded from Jordan. According to calculations, the US have expended 8 yearly productions of the THAAD system for Israel. 8 years, almost a decade in production of missiles was used in these 12 days of war. The US Army at the same time have increased their own demand for interceptor missiles by 4. So the US Army is now saying they actually need 4 times as many missiles on stock for their own needs. Then we have to say, if they have spent so much, and if the US Army demands more, that they are no longer delivering is egoistic, but it's nothing new. In times of crisis and times of war, orders from other nations are often being stopped, are being even confiscated. We have various examples. Ships are the most drastic things. For instance, 2 Ottoman battleships, the Reştaiye and the Sultan Osman I, were about to be delivered to the Ottoman Empire in 1914. In July 21st, 1914, the British decided to delay the handover of the ships that were basically done. On the 29th of July, the First Sea Lord of the Admiralty, Winston Churchill, has confiscated those ships without permission of his superiors. The cabinet had then signed off 2 days later, on the 31st of July, that act, and on the 3rd of August, the British embassy in Istanbul had officially, or in Constantinople, officially told the Ottomans that those 2 ships were confiscated. The interesting part here is UK only entered the war on August 4th. So this started almost 2 weeks, roughly 2 weeks before the UK even entered the war. They stopped the handover. So this is nothing new. Now we can interpret it obviously as Trump being mean to Ukraine, and that's one way to interpret it. Another one is that the US have probably been surprised by the volume of interceptors they have used against Iranian missiles. They've seen the results of Iranian missiles still being able to hit Israel, despite all of Israel's and US capabilities. And if they feel that they are facing a war against China, which has a significantly bigger and more sophisticated missile arsenal than the Iranians have, then they will need every interceptor they can get. Now, this might be an expectation of this. Most of you have probably heard that estimates are that a US-Chinese war is likely to start in 2027 to 28. This would only be 2 more years. And we have to say, even if the US stop delivering anything from now on, their depots should not be even be close to what they were at the beginning of 2022. After what was delivered, even after the production was increased, it seems unlikely that the depots have reached that point at that in 2027 again, let alone that the depots have increased to a degree how the need for those missiles has increased. So I don't want to apologize for the US government, for Trump, for breaking contracts, because we need to say that a war with China is getting more likely if the US shows that it gives up on allies, if it does not aid allies. This has to be said as well. So by showing weakness in regards to Ukraine, the war against China might actually be more likely, even though the US might have more weaponries for them, more missiles for themselves then. But at the same time, this has to be seen in a context, and in a historic context. This is typical behavior of a nation that expects the possibility of a war in a timely fashion. So we can interpret it either in a way that the US are mistreating Ukraine, which they undoubtedly are, especially after those contracts have already been signed. But at the same time, it is in accordance to what we would expect the US to do, potentially at least, if they expect a war against China in 27 and after having seen how effective the interceptors are against ballistic missiles from Iran, expecting much higher volume of missiles being shot at them in just 2 years' time. There's still going to be international aid. Militarny is saying that Germany is going to fund the production of 500 Liuti drones. Those are attack drones for the deep rear, so the range should be over 1,000 kilometers. And according to Militarny, Germany is financing 500 of those. That was it for today's SITREP. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. It helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment if you have something to add. And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.